The collective had refined conquest to an art form over 17,000 cycles, which was impressive considering most civilizations barely made it past their first nuclear tantrum before obliterating themselves. Their method was elegant, systematic, and backed by enough data to make a statistician weep with joy. Step 1. Observe the target species from a comfortable distance. Step 2. Analyze their communication patterns, social hierarchies, and military capabilities. Step 3. Arrive with overwhelming force and deliver terms of integration. Step 4. Wait approximately 72 local hours for the inevitable capitulation. It had worked on 463 worlds without variation. Humanity would be number 464, and the preliminary reports suggested this would be the easiest acquisition yet. The collective's surveillance drones had been watching Earth for 6 orbital periods, which the locals inexplicably divided into something called months, despite their planet taking a full solar cycle to complete its revolution. Inefficient, but charming in that way primitive things often were. The drones cataloged everything: military installations, population centers, communication networks, and most importantly, the linguistic patterns that would inform the integration protocol. Here's where things got interesting, in the way that a ticking bomb is interesting to someone who doesn't know what bombs do. Human communication, the analysts determined, operated on multiple simultaneous channels with clearly defined purposes. Formal diplomatic language appeared in government broadcasts and official statements, measured, cautious, dense with legal terminology. Military communications utilized precise tactical codes and abbreviated commands. Scientific discourse employed technical jargon that varied by discipline. Entertainment media featured emotional narratives and exaggerated scenarios, all very standard, all very predictable. The collective's linguistic algorithms, refined across countless species, identified the patterns with mechanical precision. Humans, like every other civilization, would respond to an existential threat with their formal diplomatic language. They would convene their governmental bodies, debate courses of action through official channels, and ultimately submit to superior force once they calculated the futility of resistance. The mathematical models gave it a 98.7% probability. What the algorithms missed, what no amount of surveillance could have captured, was the fundamental weirdness that humans reserved for moments when everything went sideways. The invasion fleet assembled at the edge of the solar system, a formation of 300 vessels that had reduced entire planetary defense networks to scrap metal. The collective's supreme primerant, a being whose name translated roughly to administrator of inevitable outcomes, reviewed the final preparations with the satisfaction of someone who'd done this too many times to feel anything but mild boredom. Standard integration protocol, the administrator instructed its subordinates. Hemisphere positioning, simultaneous broadcast in all documented human languages, demonstration of technological superiority through atmospheric display. Estimated compliance time, 68 hours came the response, accounting for initial denial phase and bureaucratic processing delays. Acceptable, initialize approach vector. The fleet moved forward, crossing the boundary where human detection systems would inevitably spot them. This was intentional. The shock value of sudden realization, followed by the impossibility of effective response, had proven psychologically devastating across hundreds of worlds. Prey species needed time to understand they were prey. Back on Earth, the detection happened exactly as predicted. Military installations across every continent registered the anomalies simultaneously. Satellites picked up the gravitational distortions. Radio telescopes caught the emission signatures. Within 17 minutes, every major government knew something impossible was heading toward their planet. What happened next should have followed the script. Emergency sessions of parliaments and congresses, solemn announcements from heads of state, formal diplomatic channels establishing contact protocols. Measured, official, predictable. Instead, humanity did what humanity does best when confronted with the absurd. It got weird. The first response came from a military installation in the northern hemisphere, detected by collective listening posts, expecting diplomatic overture. The transmission consisted of a single audio file and 3 words of text. The audio appeared to be what humans called music, a cultural expression the collective had documented but never quite understood. The text read, "Guessing you haven't heard this one." The song was titled "Welcome to the Jungle." The collective's linguistic processors analyzed the lyrics, searching for diplomatic meaning. They found references to violence, chaos, and something about bringing someone to their knees, threat display, sexual aggression, a cultural greeting ritual. The algorithms produced 16 different interpretations, none with confidence above 30%. Then the broadcast started multiplying. A civilian television network interrupted regular programming with a message that the computers flagged as significant. A human in formal attire sitting behind a desk, the classic configuration for important announcements. Finally, the expected diplomatic response. The human looked directly into the camera and said, "Well, folks, I never thought I'd have to update my apocalypse bingo card, but here we are. Alien invasion officially confirmed. I'd like to say we're prepared for this, but let's be honest, we're not even prepared for Tuesday." The audience present in the broadcast, for reasons the collective couldn't fathom, produced sounds indicating amusement. During an existential threat announcement, the linguistic processors flagged this as an error and requested additional data. More transmissions followed, each one more confusing than the last. A military officer in the Eastern Hemisphere broadcast tactical readiness reports, interspersed with references to ancient Earth entertainment about alien invasions, comparing the current situation to fictional scenarios with commentary about how their special effects budget had been way off. A political leader's address included the phrase "not mad, just disappointed," typically reserved for parental reprimand. Another official statement concluded with "Bring it on, space jerks," which the translators handled poorly, producing the collective equivalent of "approach with aggressive intent, interstellar discourteous persons." The administrator reviewed the incoming data with growing concern. This wasn't the pattern. This wasn't any documented pattern. Humans were supposed to be afraid, then calculating, then resigned. Instead, they appeared to be mocking the situation, processing terror through humor, communicating serious intent through deliberate absurdity. Analysis. The administrator demanded, "Explain this deviation." Unable to establish primary communication mode, its chief analyst reported, "Humans appear to be utilizing all documented language patterns simultaneously. Formal military readiness coexists with entertainment references and emotional mockery. Our models cannot isolate the authentic diplomatic channel, then isolate the military command structure, determine who makes decisions. That's complicated. Authority appears distributed across multiple governmental systems with unclear hierarchical relationships. Also, their military communications include phrases our translators cannot process. Repeated references to "hold my beer" appear in tactical contexts, but the beverages have no apparent strategic value. The administrator made a gesture that translated roughly to a sigh, though its species had no lungs. Proceed with standard protocol. Humans will adopt appropriate communication when they understand the reality of their situation. The fleet entered Earth's atmosphere in perfect formation, blocking out the sun over major population centers on 6 continents simultaneously. The demonstration of technological superiority was textbook: massive vessels hovering at impossible altitudes, energy signatures that made nuclear reactors look like birthday candles. The collective broadcast its standard integration message across all human frequencies. "People of Earth, you are hereby welcomed into the collective. Resistance is futile and unnecessary. Prepare for peaceful transition of governance. You have 72 hours to formally accept these terms." They waited for the desperate negotiations to begin, for the official diplomatic channels to open, for humanity to start speaking the language of the defeated. What they got instead was a transmission from a military command center, audio only, consisting of 2 words that would haunt the collective's linguistic databases for generations. "Game on." The translator processors worked overtime trying to decode the strategic implication. Game implied competition, contest, sport. On suggested activation, engagement, commencement. Together they formed a phrase that made no tactical sense, no diplomatic sense, no sense at all, unless, and this was the part that should have terrified the collective, unless humans had looked at an overwhelming invasion force and decided the appropriate response was to treat it like a challenge they were eager to accept. The administrators stared at the translated message, then at the incoming data feeds showing humans mobilizing with alarming speed, then back at the message. Somewhere in its advanced consciousness, a thought formed that had never occurred in 463 previous invasions. What if the algorithms had missed something important? But that was impossible. The collective had refined these protocols across. The data was comprehensive. The models were flawless. Humans were just another species, and this was just another integration. The 72-hour countdown began with the collective's fleet maintaining their atmospheric positions, engines humming with the kind of power that could glass a continent before breakfast. Standard procedure dictated that the invaded species would spend these hours in frantic governmental sessions, tearful public addresses, and eventually the drafting of surrender documents. The collective had even prepared reception facilities for the incoming delegation. 40 minutes into the countdown, humanity started shooting. Not everywhere at once. That would have been too coordinated, too predictable. No, the attacks came from random locations, with no apparent strategic value. A farmer in the southern continent fired a hunting rifle at a vessel, hovering 3 miles above his barn. The projectile didn't even reach cruising altitude before gravity pulled it back down. But the act itself registered on every collective sensor. The analysts flagged it as an anomaly, individual aggression without command authorization. Then a city in the Western Hemisphere launched something the humans called fireworks. At the nearest ship, colorful explosives that did precisely 0 damage, but created spectacular visual display. The collective's threat assessment system screamed bloody murder, trying to classify weapons that appeared designed purely for aesthetic purposes. "They're celebrating," one analyst reported. Voice modulator crackling with confusion. Sensors detect gatherings in multiple urban centers, elevated noise levels, consumption of ethanol. They're having parties. The administrator would have rubbed its sensory organs if it had any. Parties. During an invasion. Clarify the tactical purpose. There doesn't appear to be. Wait, receiving multiple transmissions from these gatherings. Translating now. The analyst paused. Processors working overtime. They're saying, if the world's ending, might as well go out drunk. Also something about alien apocalypse, pub crawl, and last call for the human race. This was not the algorithm. This was not any algorithm. Then the actual military response began, and things got substantially weirder. A squadron of human aircraft appeared on sensors, approaching a collective vessel at attack velocity. Standard interception protocols engaged automatically. Defensive fields activated. Targeting systems locked on. The humans would bounce off the shields, recognize their technological inferiority, and retreat. Simple. The aircraft didn't bounce. They flew straight into the shields at full speed, and at the last possible second. All of them simultaneously broke formation in different directions, while ejecting clouds of metallic chaff and electronic countermeasure. The collective's targeting systems, designed to track single high-value threats, lost lock in the chaos. Before the computers could recalibrate, the aircraft were gone. They hadn't fired a shot. They just wanted to see what would happen. Tactical analysis. The administrator demanded. What was the purpose of that maneuver? Unknown. They achieved nothing except data collection on our defensive systems. And the tactical officer hesitated. We're intercepting communications from the pilots. They appear to be laughing. Laughing. Yes, administrator. Also using phrases our translators flag as extreme profanity, mixed with what might be expressions of exhilaration. One pilot broadcast, "Did you see their shields light up like a rave? That was beautiful." We're uncertain what a rave is in tactical context. The administrator accessed the collective's comprehensive database of conquered species, 463 previous invasions, thousands of documented first contact scenarios. Not one included the invaded species, treating military engagement as entertainment. Meanwhile, human command centers were conducting their own analysis, and the conversation would have given the collective's analysts a migraine if they could have heard it. A general stood in a bunker 300 feet below ground, surrounded by screens showing collective vessels hovering over every major city. His staff had spent the last hour calculating missile trajectories, running simulations, and trying to determine if humanity's entire nuclear arsenal could scratch the paint on these things. The answer was probably not, but nobody wanted to say it out loud. Options, the general said, which was military code for tell me something that isn't we're all going to die. Conventional weapons are ineffective against their shielding, his tactical officer reported. Nuclear options would be ineffective and potentially counterproductive. EMPs might disrupt their systems, but we'd also knock out every circuit on the planet. Biological weapons are non-viable against unknown alien physiology. Chemical weapons. Are we seriously running through the greatest hits of war crimes right now? Just being thorough. The general stared at the screens, watching the massive alien vessels, just sitting there, hovering, waiting, like they had all the time in the world because they probably did. They gave us 72 hours, he said slowly. Why? Psychological warfare, someone suggested. Let the panic set in. Soften us up for surrender. Maybe. The general pulled up the translated message again, reading the formal text about peaceful integration and inevitable submission. It was the kind of language you used when you'd done something so many times you had a template. Or maybe they've done this before. A lot. And they think they know exactly how it's going to go. Sir? They're following a script. Standard invasion protocol probably, which means they've made assumptions about how we'll respond. The general's expression shifted into something that might have been a smile if smiles were tactical weapons. What if we don't? The tactical officer caught on immediately. Break their pattern. Do things they don't expect. Do things nobody would expect. Because nobody sane would do them. The general opened a comm channel to every military command center on the planet. Attention all units. New operational parameters. Ignore conventional tactical doctrine. We're not trying to win. We can't win. We're trying to be so aggressively weird that these things can't predict our next move. Make them confused. Make them uncertain. Make them think twice about whether humanity is worth the trouble. There was a pause while commanders across 6 continents processed this order. Then, one by one, confirmations started rolling in. Not with formal acknowledgments, but with phrases like finally a mission brief I can work with, and permission to get creative, and most concerning, define too weird. There is no too weird, the general said. That's the point. What followed would later be termed the confusion offensive, though historians would argue about whether it constituted actual military doctrine, or just humanity having a collective nervous breakdown at scale. Cities began broadcasting human music at maximum volume toward the hovering vessels. Not weapons, just noise. Everything from classical symphonies to something called death metal, which the collective's translators insisted couldn't be actual music because the mathematics didn't work. One city exclusively played recordings of infants crying, which triggered 17 different threat assessment subroutines simultaneously. Military installations painted enormous images on their roofs. Not camouflage or deception patterns. Just weird art. Geometric shapes that hurt to look at. Portraits of historical figures the aliens wouldn't recognize. In one case, a detailed reproduction of an ancient human meme showing a cat demanding cheeseburgers, which the collective spent 4 hours analyzing for encrypted military communication. Civilian populations, instead of panicking, began gathering in streets to wave at the ships. Some held signs with messages ranging from "Welcome to Earth," "Please don't kill us," to "My other car is also not a spaceship," to symbols the collective's computers flagged as potentially offensive gestures, though nobody could determine what they were offensive to. The collective watched all of this with mounting alarm. Every piece of data contradicted their models. Every human action defied prediction. They'd expected fear, desperation, calculation. They got absurdist theater performed at planetary scale. Administrator, the chief analyst reported, its voice modulator barely concealing panic.
We need to discuss the possibility that our invasion protocols are inadequate for this species. Inadequate. We've used these protocols successfully for 463 invasions against species that responded rationally to overwhelming force. Humans appear to respond to overwhelming force by becoming more irrational. The analyst pulled up data streams showing the chaos below. They're not fighting us. They're not surrendering. I don't know what they're doing. Our models have no category for it. The administrator watched a feed showing human aircraft doing barrel rolls around one of their vessels, while trailing colored smoke, not attacking, just flying, for no tactical purpose whatsoever. Continue observation, it finally ordered. They'll exhaust themselves eventually, all species do. But even as it gave the order, the administrator felt something it had never experienced in 463 invasions. Doubt. Humanity had looked at certain extinction, and decided the appropriate response was to get creative. And creativity, the collective was beginning to understand, was far more dangerous than weapons.
By hour 36 of the 72-hour deadline, the collective's linguistic analysis teams had expanded from 3 specialists to 47. And they still couldn't figure out what the humans were actually saying. The problem wasn't translation. The computers handled that fine. The problem was that translation and meaning had apparently divorced in human communication. And meaning was keeping the kids while translation got stuck with all the debt. A human military transmission intercepted at 0400 hours provided a perfect example. Command to Delta Wing. The chickens have left the coop. I repeat, the chickens have left the coop. Proceed to the big shiny targets and show them our dance move. The collective's computers dutifully translated this into their language. Then spent 6 hours trying to determine what terrestrial poultry and physical movement patterns had to do with military operations. Cross-referencing human agriculture databases helped not at all. Neither did accessing their entertainment archives, which somehow made everything more confusing by suggesting that humans used food-related terminology for everything from romantic encounters to military disasters. They're using code, one analyst insisted. Encrypted communications disguised as nonsense. Then decrypt it, the administrator ordered. 3 hours later. We can't. There's no mathematical pattern. It's either the most sophisticated encryption in galactic history, or they're actually just saying random things and somehow understanding each other. The second option was somehow more terrifying than the first, but the real breakthrough in understanding, or rather the complete collapse of understanding, came when the collective finally managed to tap into human command centers directly. They expected tactical discussions, strategic planning, careful analysis of alien capability. What they heard instead sounded like controlled chaos having an argument with barely suppressed hysteria. A commander in the Eastern Hemisphere addressed her troops before a planned engagement. All right, people, listen up. We're going out there to poke a technologically superior alien war machine with sticks and see what happens. Is this a good idea? Absolutely not. Are we doing it anyway? You're damn right we are. Why? Because apparently, humans respond to existential terror by getting sarcastic, and at this point we're leaning into it. The troops responded with sounds the collective's computers categorized as aggressive approval vocalizations, not fear, not determination, something in between that their databases had no name for. Another intercept caught a conversation between 2 pilots preparing for a reconnaissance run. You think they know we can't actually hurt them? Oh, they definitely know. And we're still going out there to annoy them into submission. That's the whole strategy apparently. Make them so confused they leave out of frustration. That's the dumbest thing I've ever heard. I know, right? Let's do it. The collective's analysts flagged this exchange as critical intelligence. Humans knew they were outmatched. They understood the futility of conventional resistance, and somehow, this knowledge made them more aggressive, not less. The psychological models couldn't account for it. Fear was supposed to trigger either submission or desperate violence, not whatever this was. The administrator called an emergency session of its command staff. Explain to me why humans are acting like this. Working theory, the chief analyst began carefully, is that we've fundamentally misunderstood their crisis response patterns. When humans face overwhelming threats, they don't just calculate odds and act rational. They engage in what their own psychologists call gallows humor, using absurdist comedy as a stress response. So they're making jokes while we conquer them. Not exactly. They're making jokes as part of conquering us. Silence filled the command chamber. The kind of silence that happens when someone says something so absurd it takes a moment to process. That makes no sense. The administrator finally said. Agreed. Yet observe. The analyst pulled up footage of a human military unit that had positioned themselves directly under a collective vessel. They weren't fortified. They weren't attacking. They were holding up enormous signs with messages like honk if you're invading, and phone home, you're drunk, and we apologize for the inconvenience of your invasion. What possible strategic purpose? They're mocking us, publicly, repeatedly. And it's worked. The administrator's confusion must have been evident, because the analyst continued. Our crews are rattled. They've trained for enemy fire, desperate last stands, suicide attacks. They haven't trained for being laughed at while morale is dropping because nobody knows how to respond to an enemy that treats warfare like performance art. Another analyst chimed in. We're also detecting increased communications between human populations that weren't cooperating before. Nations with histories of conflict are sharing tactical data and coordinating responses. They're unifying against us, but not through fear, through shared amusement at their own audacity. The administrator accessed the psychological warfare database, searching for any precedent. The closest match came from a species on the outer rim that had responded to invasion by ignoring it completely, going about their daily lives as if the fleet didn't exist. That had been unnerving, but manageable. This was different. Humans acknowledged the invasion, understood its implications, and decided to treat it like a challenge they found entertaining. Down on Earth, human commanders were having similar revelations from the opposite perspective. The general stood before a wall of screens showing collective vessels still hovering, still waiting, still following whatever protocol they decided on. His staff had just finished analyzing 12 hours of alien communications, and the results were fascinating. They're panicking, the intelligence officer reported, trying to suppress a grin. Not combat panic, organizational panic. Their communications show increasing requests for guidance, references to unprecedented scenarios, multiple mentions of procedural deviations. We're breaking their playbook. Good, the general said. What else? Their vessels are maintaining position, but energy signatures show fluctuations consistent with stress responses. They're not sure what to do with us. Also, and this is interesting, we've detected increased communications between their fleet and what we think is a home base. They're asking for advice. The general felt something he hadn't felt since the invasion began, not hope that humanity would win in conventional terms. The aliens could still obliterate them without breaking a sweat, but hope that maybe, just maybe, humanity could be irritating enough that the aliens decided Earth wasn't worth the trouble. Keep up the pressure, he ordered. Random harassment, no pattern they can predict. Make every engagement weird. If they adapt to our tactics, change tactics, stay unpredictable. Sir, that's not really a sustainable military doctrine. I know, but it doesn't need to be sustainable. It just needs to work long enough for them to decide we're too annoying to integrate into their collective, or empire, or whatever they're calling it. Across the planet, human forces adapted to their new operational parameters with disturbing creativity. Fighter jets buzzed alien vessels while broadcasting elevator music. Ground forces set up massive speakers playing contradictory messages in 17 languages. One particularly innovative unit built a device that emitted frequencies calculated to be just slightly irritating, without being actively harmful. The military equivalent of a mosquito that won't leave you alone. The collective watched, analyzed, and slowly came to a horrifying realization. They didn't understand humans at all. Every response, every tactic, every communication, defied their carefully constructed models, and worse, the humans seemed to know it. They weren't fighting to win, they were fighting to be incomprehensible, and incomprehensibility, as the collective was learning, was a weapon no shielding could stop. Hour 68 of the 72-hour deadline arrived with the collective's fleet still hovering, still waiting, and still trying to figure out what in the name of every conquered world was happening down there. The breaking point came during what should have been a routine psychological warfare demonstration. The collective selected a major population center and performed a show of force energy weapons firing into an uninhabited desert area, vaporizing several square miles of sand into glass. The message was clear: this could be your cities. Humanity's response arrived within minutes. Not surrender, Not even defiance in the traditional sense. Someone had organized a planetary flash mob across 6 continents in every time zone. Humans simultaneously emerged from their homes and began dancing. Not organized military formations, just people dancing in the streets, on rooftops, in parking lots, anywhere visible from above, millions of them, tens of millions, all moving to music. The collective sensors could detect broadcasting at maximum volume from every available speaker. The collective's threat assessment computers had a collective aneurysm, trying to classify this as either attack or surrender. Analysis, the administrator demanded, watching its screens fill with gyrating humans. They're celebrating, the analyst offered weakly, or having coordinated seizures. The distinction is unclear. Why would they celebrate after we demonstrated our destructive capacity? According to intercepted communications, they're quoting something from their entertainment archives. Dance like nobody's watching, even though aliens definitely are. I don't know what that means. Administrator, I don't think they know what that means. I'm not sure. Meaning is still a factor in human decision-making. The administrator watched a particular group of humans who'd formed a circle, and were taking turns performing individual movements in the center, while others provided rhythmic encouragement. The tactical implications of this behavior were precisely zero. The psychological implications were giving its processors headaches. Open communication channel to human command, it ordered. We need clarification on their response parameters. The channel opened. A human appeared on screen, middle-aged, military uniform, expression somewhere between exhausted and amused. General speaking. You folks ready to talk terms? We are attempting, the administrator said carefully, to understand your species' response to our integration protocol. Our response? We're responding exactly how you'd expect. You are responding in literally no way we expected. You dance during shows of force. You laugh during military engagement. You mock our vessels with signs and music. What is your strategic objective? The general leaned back and something crossed his face that the collective's emotion recognition software flagged as dangerous. A genuine smile. You want to know our strategy? Fine. We're not trying to beat you militarily. Obviously can't do that. We're trying to make you realize that integrating humanity into your collective would be the worst decision you've ever made. Elaborate. Think about it. You've got this nice, organized, probably very efficient galactic civilization. Everything runs smoothly, because everyone follows your protocols and thinks rationally, and acts predictably. The general gestured vaguely. Now imagine adding 7 billion humans to that mix. 7 billion creatures who respond to overwhelming force by getting sarcastic, who treat existential threats like inconvenient hobbies, who will, guaranteed, spend every single day finding new and creative ways to be aggressively weird, just because they can. The administrator processed this. You're proposing that annoying us is a viable defense strategy. Not proposing, demonstrating. Tell me honestly, has this invasion gone according to plan? Silence from the collective's end. Long uncomfortable silence. That's what I thought. The general continued. And here's the thing. This is us being relatively well behaved because we're terrified. Imagine what we'd be like once we got comfortable. Every day, some human would find a new way to break your protocols just to see what happens. We'd ask questions you don't have answers to. We'd mix up your carefully organized systems with our chaos. We'd teach your other species that rules are negotiable, and authority is optional, and sometimes the best response to impossible situations is to laugh and see what breaks first. The administrator consulted its database of integrated species, 463 civilizations, all functioning smoothly within collective parameters, all predictable, all manageable, all nothing like humans. You're suggesting, it said slowly, that conquering you would be more trouble than benefit. I'm not suggesting anything. I'm telling you that humanity is a cultural hazard. We're the galactic equivalent of that one weird ingredient that ruins the whole recipe. You can absolutely conquer us, your ships, your tech, your resources. All say you win, but winning means dealing with us, forever, every single day. Are you really prepared for that? The administrator looked at its screens. Humans still dancing, still broadcasting music and nonsense messages, still treating invasion like entertainment. Its analysts had compiled reports showing decreased fleet morale, increased confusion among command staff, and a complete breakdown of predictive models for human behavior. 463 invasions without incident, without complication, without species that responded to annihilation by having parties and making jokes and asking if the aliens had heard about their Lord and Savior. Chaos theory. The administrator made a decision that would echo through collective history as either profound wisdom or catastrophic failure, depending on which analyst you asked. Withdraw all vessels to orbital distance. Maintain observation protocols only. Mark Earth as unsuitable for integration at this time. Administrator, the fleet is ready to. I said withdraw. This species is psychologically incompatible with collective structure. Integration would be resource negative, which was technically true, if you defined resources to include sanity. The fleet began its ascent back to orbit, and across Earth, humans watched their screens showing alien vessels retreating. Not fleeing, the movement was too controlled for that, but definitely leaving. The dancing continued, now mixed with cheering and sounds of disbelief and more than a few humans just sitting down heavily, because apparently constant terror for 3 days was exhausting. The general closed the communication channel and leaned back in his chair, feeling approximately 1,000 years old. His staff stood silent, watching confirmation after confirmation that the alien fleet was actually genuinely leaving. Did we just win? Someone finally asked. No, the general said. We didn't win. We were too irritating to conquer, which might be the most human victory condition in history. So what do we tell people? Tell them the truth. We survived first contact by being aggressively ourselves. And if the aliens ever come back, we'll just have to be even weirder. Up in orbit, the collective's fleet completed its withdrawal, sensors still trained on the planet below. The administrator composed its official report with the careful precision of someone explaining a failure they didn't quite understand themselves. Species designation, human. Status, observed but not integrated. Reason, psychological warfare capabilities exceed technological limitation. Cultural contamination risk deemed unacceptable. Recommendation, avoid further contact pending development of new integration protocols specifically designed for species that weaponize absurdity. The report was filed. The fleet jumped to their next assignment. And somewhere in the vast bureaucracy of the collective, a note was added to humanity's file that translated roughly to, "Don't bother unless you enjoy headaches." Humanity continued spinning on its little planet, blissfully unaware that they'd just established themselves as the one species in the galaxy too annoying to conquer. They went back to their wars and politics and endless arguments about everything, secure in the knowledge that they'd faced an existential threat, and responded by being so authentically, chaotically human, that the universe itself had decided to find easier target. The aliens had come expecting conquest and found confusion. They'd prepared for war and encountered performance art. They'd followed every protocol perfected over countless invasions, and humanity had responded by ignoring every rule of engagement and inventing new ones that made no tactical sense whatsoever. In the end, the collective learned what every species eventually learns about humanity. They don't fight fair, they don't think straight, and they absolutely will turn any situation, including alien invasion, into an opportunity to be creatively, magnificently, dangerously weird. And that, as it turned out, was the most human superpower of all.